Hello, I was tasked with developing a new scope and sequence guide to meet the needs of our socials department at Parkview Intermediate. Throughout this presentation, I will discuss the elements that went into creating the scope and sequence guide and go over the scope and sequence guides with you. All of you should have a copy of the scope and sequence guide in front of you, which will discuss later in the presentation. Let's get started. So the first thing I'm going to go over is the table of contents. There are 7 sections in this presentation. They include the purpose, so the overall purpose of the project, the overarching objectives of the project, the SWOT analysis that was performed on the project, accessing the scope and sequence guide. We will actually take a look at and go over the new scope and sequence guide. We will discuss the implementation plan and our plan for tracking data and how that will be used. And then our final section will be a question and answer section. Now, as you can see, section 7 is when we'll be doing the Q&A session. So you have the opportunity to ask all of your questions during that time. Please write down any questions that you may have throughout the presentation so we can discuss when we get to section 7. So section 1 is the purpose. So the purpose of this project is Parkview Intermediate transitioned from 7th grade social studies being an every other day to an everyday class for the 2021-2022 school year. Our school needs a scope and sequence guide that incorporates all the 7th grade TEKS and 8th grade TEKS where the content aligns. The Social Studies Department Chair and the Social Studies Campus Administrator feel the best way to approach teaching Texas history is to cover the 7th grade TEKS and pre-teaching 8th grade TEKS. This purpose of the new approach will hopefully improve the STAR scores by building content knowledge by pre-teaching that 8th grade content. As you know, Texas history did not happen in a bubble, so we need to make sure that our students understand what's going on in the world around Texas. The scope and sequence will provide the social studies teachers with a breakdown of the TEKS for each unit, a time frame for the units, and it will also incorporate the 8th grade TEKS into the 7th grade curriculum. Now we move on to section 2, our overarching objectives. So the objectives for this project is to provide the social studies teachers at Parkview Intermediate with a detailed curriculum guide for the 2022-2023 academic year. The new scope and sequence will incorporate 7th and 8th grade content where they overlap or where it makes sense to combine the content or add it into the Texas history content. As I mentioned earlier, it's very important that our students understand what's going on around Texas and prepare them for 8th grade. Pre-teaching the 8th grade content will provide background knowledge for our students, which will allow them to be more successful in 8th grade social studies. As 8th grade social studies is a STAR-tested subject, our social studies subject should improve by the students seeing the content in 7th grade and 8th grade. Also, by incorporating 7th and 8th grade content, it will build team collaboration as the entire social studies department will work together to improve how we teach Texas history on our campus, because it's going to benefit the 8th grade teachers that their 7th grade students have this background knowledge coming into their classrooms. So it's good that now we'll be combining them we'll be working in both subjects in 7th grade instead of both the 7th and 8th grade teachers doing their own thing. Now they'll be aligned together. Let's move on to section 3 of the presentation. So section 3 is the SWOT analysis. So these are the strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats that were found as this project was being developed. The strengths of the project is that the entire 7th grade social studies team will teach the curriculum at the same pace. We will pre-teach 8th grade content. By connecting U.S. and Texas history, we will build on students' inferencing skills and background knowledge. The collaboration between 7th and 8th grade teams will allow for the 8th grade content to be taught in 7th grade, which will hopefully improve the star scores for social studies, as students will see the content in 7th and 8th grade. Now we'll move on to the weaknesses. The weaknesses that must be addressed for successful implementation of this project are the 7th grade teachers going to have to build their U.S. history content knowledge. As most of them have been teaching 7th grade Texas history for years, now it's time for them to start learning the 8th grade content as well. Teachers must be cognizant of how they present the content to students to avoid the students being overwhelmed with too much information at one time. Another potential weakness for the project is students may not retain the content knowledge from 7th to 8th grade. Now this project also presents great opportunities. By incorporating 7th and 8th grade curriculum, we can build content, pedagogical, and technology knowledge among all social studies teachers. We will build an environment of collaboration among the entire social studies team. If the objectives are met, we can serve as a model of how to teach Texas history for other PISD campuses. Students will also have increased background knowledge on the 8th grade content. Possible threats with this project is the misuse or improper use of technology in the classroom, as many of our lessons that we'll be using will be incorporating technology to make the lessons more engaging. We could get pushback from the district administrators about this new approach for teaching 7th grade social studies because it could have a negative impact on the student mastery of 7th grade social studies curriculum if there's too much time spent on the 8th grade curriculum. It will be very important to follow the scope and sequence guide to maintain proper balance. Section 4, accessing the scope and sequence. So this slide is going to outline the steps that you must take to access the scope and sequence guide. It will be housed in our social studies resources. The file will be view only for all teachers. The only people with editing rights are the social studies administrator, the social studies department chair, and the instructional designer. The first thing you must do to access the scope and sequence is you must be logged into your PISD Google account. You will then go to the Parkview Resources website, scroll down to the subject section and click on Social Studies, click on Texas History, click on Resources, and you will see the 2022-2023 Social Studies Scope and Sequence along with the other curriculum resources. Section 5, the Scope and Sequence Guide. We will now go over the actual Scope and Sequence Guide. Please take your paper copy of the Scope and Sequence Guide out that you have in front of you, and we will go over it and discuss it. Now let's take a look at the Scope and Sequence Guide for the 2022-2023 school year. All right, the first section that you'll come to on the Scope and Sequence Guide is the standard type. So as you're reviewing the TEKS, if you see a red TEK, that means that is a readiness standard. If you see a green TEK, it's a process standard. And if it's a supporting standard, it will be colored blue. So in our first grading period for next school year, our first unit will be Natural Texas and its people. In this unit, you have one readiness standard, one process standard, and two supporting standards that you will be teaching. The different topics that you'll cover are the 4 regions of Texas, the physical characteristics of Texas, adaptations and modifications to the environment, and the Native American cultures of Texas. This particular unit has 4 essential questions that the students will be able to answer after you complete this unit, and it will take you 9 days to complete the unit. Once you complete Natural Texas and its People, you'll move on to Spanish Exploration and Colonization. Again, you have your TEKS listed here. You have 1 readiness standard, 2 process standards, and 1 supporting standard to go over. The different topics that will be covered in this unit are the European exploration, the methods of settlement, European colonization, and the Spanish influence on Texas. Again, you have 3 essential questions for this unit that your students must be able to answer at the end of the unit, and you'll have 9 days to complete this unit. Now, you'll see that the next unit you come to is Exploration and Colonization. This particular unit is highlighted yellow, so anytime you're in the scope and sequence guide and you come across a yellow highlighted title, that means it is an 8th grade unit that we are pre-teaching in 7th grade. So these are the different 8th grade TEKS that you'll be covering in this unit, and all of them except 1 are readiness standards. You'll have the reasons for exploration and colonization, economics of colonial regions, and representative government. And here are your 2 essential questions that students will answer after covering this 6-day unit. Now, as you can see, you will teach Spanish colonization and then move into the colonization and exploration of America as a whole, so the students can get a better grasp of what's going on in the United States. At the same time, the Spanish are focusing on Texas. You have the French and the English focusing on other parts of North America, so that students have to understand this, and they'll have that background knowledge when they enter the 8th grade. The next thing that comes chronologically in the history is the American Revolution. Again, this is also an 8th grade unit. Here you have 3 readiness standards that you'll be teaching, and here are the topics that you'll cover. The students, again, will have 2 essential questions to answer at the end, and you will have 7 days to cover this unit. You'll then move back into the Texas part of the curriculum. You'll go into the Mexican national era, so the students will understand how America got its freedom. Then they'll start to understand how Mexico got its freedom. Here are your different TEKS that you'll cover, the topics, and again, the students will have 2 essential questions to answer with 8 days to complete the unit. You will wrap up the 2nd grading period with the Texas Revolution. So the students understand how the United States became a country and got its freedom. They understand how Mexico became a country and got its freedom. Now they're going to move into how Texas got its freedom. Here are your different TEKS you'll cover. You have 2 readiness standards. The different topics will be the events leading to the Texas Revolution, significant people of the revolution, the effects that the revolution had, and the events of the Texas Revolution. And the students will again have 2 essential questions to answer at the end of this 15-day unit. Okay, now we've discussed the scope and sequence guide, we'll move ahead in our presentation. Section 6 of our presentation is implementation and tracking data. So to ensure this project meets its stated objectives, and to respond to any possible weaknesses discovered during the SWOT analysis, we will follow this implementation plan. There will be summer professional development for 7th grade social studies teachers to ensure that their gaps in the 8th grade content knowledge are closed, and technology professional development as well. The instructional designer is developing some engaging lessons for each unit, and the teachers need to fully grasp the technology applications they would use this upcoming school year. There will be fully developed lessons and activities for all teachers to use on the Parkview Resources website. We will have meetings at the beginning of the school year to discuss the new lessons. and for the 7th grade teachers to get feedback from 8th grade teachers on best practices for teaching 8th grade units. As we go through the school year, we will discuss the curriculum during our weekly PLCs. Now, tracking data. The entire 7th grade team will use common assessments this school year, and student performance will be tracked by TEAC. We will take the data from the assessments to use this to help our students. All the assessments the students take will be on Aware. We will discuss the data during our weekly PLCs. Teachers will use the data for small group intervention and workshops. We will compile and analyze the data at the end of the school year to determine what changes need to be made to the scope and sequence and associated lessons and activities that were created for this school year. Our 2022-2023 7th graders will be the first to experience learning Texas history this way. We will review the STAR scores at the end of the 2023-2024 school year, as our 7th graders will then be 8th graders and will have taken their 8th grade STAR test for social studies. We will compare the data for the STAR scores for the 2023-2024 school year to the previous 3 years to determine was there an improvement in this new approach and determine its successfulness. I will now open the floor up for questions. What questions do you have about what we just went over? I appreciate you taking the time to listen to my presentation. Thank you.